All right, folks, up next, we've got something really special lined up and that I'm super excited about. This session is all about the power of storytelling for kids. Do you know how reading stories to children can make them wide eyed and excited? Well, it's not just fun, it's super important. Stories can help them learn, understand emotions, and see the world in new ways. In this fireside chat on What's Once Upon a Time, unleashing the magic of stories to captivate and educate little minds, speakers are going to chat about why storytelling rocks for kids. They'll share tips on how to pick awesome books and how stories can teach students cool stuff without them even realizing it. So let's give a big warm welcome to Dr. Louise Deborensky, owner of INSL LLC, and Gary Fry, the district grant writer for Columbia Public Schools. Welcome.
Thank you. Normally I could use my indoor PE voice and be heard, but
Is this mic working?
I don't know. Is this mic working?
Is his mic working? Oh, no. I'm starting to feel a little silly. I don't know about all of y'all, but I'm having a great time. But I'm tired at this point. And so I hope that the audience will join us in this conversation because the fireside chat, we don't have a fireplace here, but we do have a lot of fire. So I hope that everybody will be able to join in this conversation. I'm Dr. Louise Deborensky, and I have a long interest in storytelling and how stories are related to how we learn. And I'm really happy to be here with Dr. Fry.
And I am a substitute. A substitute in the fact that whoever was supposed to be here got ill. And so I'm going to tell a story because, well, that's just what I do. Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought you were going to tell a
Oh,
story.
okay.
Tell us a
Yes.
story.
No,
We
I'm
want to
going to
hear a
get it.
story.
Okay. Now, the story's about little cherubs. I've got to tell you one thing. I'm going to stand up to do this. And this may sound ridiculous when you look at me, but I'm now a lean, trim, mean fighting machine. And you go, oh, haven't you noticed you're fat? And the reason I tell this was several years ago. And according to my former wife, with the weight I lost and her leaving, I lost two normal size females because I've about 150 pounds lighter than I was because they got my diabetes under control and I started getting fat. I said, so you mean if I just eat cakes, pies, ice cream, I'd be skinny, but I die quick? And I went, huh. And the story goes like this. I was at a conference like this, wasn't a conference, people. Elevator doors open up. And I love little cherubs because, as Art Linkletter said, we'll see who are the old people in the room. Kids tell the most amazing stories. So this little kid looks at me because I'm standing in the elevator like this. Imagine another average sized female smished into me. And the door's open and he looks and he goes, why you so fat? And I get down like this. I go, well, honey, you know how your mom tells you you're supposed to eat your vegetables and you're not supposed to have so much desserts? Does your mama tell you that? Yeah. Well, if you don't listen to your mama and you eat too many desserts, you start looking like this. So you need to go outside and play and eat your desserts so you won't end up looking like me. And he goes, oh. And the mother's doing this. "Uh, uh, 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 I'm so sorry." And I said, well, it's not like I looked down, oh my God, where did all this weight come from? Now, That's one of the stories I tell. I got another one. We're going to do you because, unlike most educators in the room, I'm fully certifiable because I have my 32 educational certifications. So, all the required subjects I can teach, all the administrative jobs but superintendent I can do because I'd get fired because a teacher would tell me, those children don't want to learn. I'd go, really? Even parents that are thieves want their kids to be better thieves than them so they don't have to go to jail. So don't tell me those kids don't want to learn. It's not like they have student teacher in their title. We have some of those here, but they're not your kids. But the other story goes like this. How many of y'all know about the War of 1812? And I can kind of see you because I was a national thespian, so I've learned to see lights. I just saw very few hands. Short thing, War of 1812 was where if there had been a transatlantic cable, the war would have probably never happened because the British Parliament decided it was not good to impress, which means they were stealing United States sailors to put them in the British Army because they were having problems because they were fighting France, they were running out of sailors. Andrew Jackson was the only one that actually won the war. That's when they burnt the White House. uh, it got Andrew Jackson to become president. But I walked into the social studies class because one of the people saw me in the hall, and as their grant writer, they said, go down to the social study, tell them we need them for an ARD meeting. That's admission, review, and dismissal, which the meeting, and it's for special ed, and it should just actually be called R and no D because we never dismiss anybody. But they said, oh, go down and get him. And I walked in and I went, oh, what y'all studying? I can teach social studies. Said War 1812. And I went, oh, you know what's important about the War of 1812? And they went, no. How many of y'all have ever heard of Hessians and Pilgrims? Well, yeah. How many of you ever met a Hessian or a Pilgrim? No. Well, the War of 1812, the reason it's got a number, not like something important like Vietnam War, World War II, World War I, that's where the Hessians and the Pilgrims fought one another and they killed one another. All of them are dead now. And this poor social studies teacher's looking at me because since they knew I brought in money to the school and would get stuff, they put up with me. Why are you in my classroom and why are you teaching the people this? Because they are going to remember this. They're not going to remember all that other stuff that you said about, well, because you're needed for an ARD meeting. And I thought if I gave the kids something unique, my coming here would be known. But now I'm going to get into another one. Actually, with stories, that I love this person that can do this. I have an uncle, kinda, Choctaw, who took all of the stories that his dad, who was on a reservation school, who was punished for speaking his native language, but he survived and kept his kids with it, wrote Little Eagle books. And he told the stories about how you catch a rabbit and all of this. And since it is about books, I'll put a plug in for Little Eagle. It's Ralph Williston is his real name, but he writes under Little Eagle. But the thing that was good about his books, when you know him, well, on my 21st century after school grant, I said, oh, Ralph, I'll just pay you to come in. Bring some of your books because I'm going to buy them for the kids and you can give them out as gifts. And he was in his full regalia as far as not the headdress because he wasn't a chief, but his beaded stuff and everything else, and telling him about, oh yeah, because the rabbit will run this way. But as the person is hunting it, you go this way. And then the rabbit eventually runs into you and you catch it. And he had a book that went with it and gave it to people. And since this was supposed to be about actual stories instead of what I love to do of tell stories, the thing that I liked about Ralph's book, it took the culture that, nothing personal, all y'all that got more melanin in the room, you're not going to be surprised by this. By the white folks tried to suppress the culture because it ain't us. You have to act white. He saved the stories of his uncle or his dad. He got them in a way that the kids were engaged. And they said, "We're going to go out and catch a rabbit." I go, "Yeah, he's talking about Midwest rabbits. These are jackrabbits here. They run a little bit faster. But in person, it's going to be fun watching y'all try to catch a rabbit." And now I'm going to turn it over to you so you can actually tell something that was related to the topic.
About the time when I actually caught a rabbit. No. Well, I getting back to this to the topic of stories.
Storytelling.
So we all enjoy hearing a story. I really just had fun listening to these stories, sir. Um, and and there's some things that we can know as teachers about stories and about how we learn that can be helpful in taking us forward in our classrooms, and whether our children, our students are children or adults. One thing that I don't think we learn as teachers is that anything new that you learn, you have to learn it in relationship to yourself. So if you're learning something new that you've never heard about, you have to link it to who you are as a person. And so, one of the wonderful things that teachers can do for their children, especially at the elementary level, but really at any level, is to tell a story about yourself to introduce the material. For example, Dr. Bonnie Robb does this wonderful unit for her first graders on ants. And they read about ants and write about ants and look at videos about, I mean, they do everything on ants. They have ants in the classroom. But she starts that off by telling a story about how one morning she came down to her kitchen and there were all these little black things running around on her counter, and she realized she had spilled some sugar and that there were ants on her counter, and she wondered how they got there. And so then the children were able to talk about how when they saw an ant at their house, and whether the ant was in the house or climbing the wall or what it was doing. And so they were able to relate that story to themselves. So that's really how, as learners, we all learn. I have a doctoral degree, but when I learn something brand new, I need to learn that in relationship to what who I am and what I know and what I've already experienced before I can apply that knowledge to who you are and what I know about you. So that's something I think is really important for us to remember, that the story is kind of an intrinsic part of who we are as human beings and how we communicate with each other. And it's also the first place that we need to go with our students, engaging them in new topics or ideas. Do you have anything you want to share on that?
Well, and whenever we're looking at this to kind of get serious, these were the magical things that we call in education teachable moments. And one of the things that I always like to do is engage a kids, but sometimes do things that are not expected because all of a sudden you get cognitive dissonance. We'll use fancy terms. In other words, you go, "That don't make sense." And how do I make sense of this? Because as humans, we look at clouds and we see all these pictures in the clouds and all these things. Those are just water vapor in the air, really. But we want to put patterns on things. And if you tell a good story, you're giving a person a pattern and they go, "Oh, I remember this crazy person who said this story about being really fat and the little kid." And I've had a student that's asked me something that they really actually want to know about, but it's not with my lesson plan. You don't go, "Oh, no, honey, honey, honey." No, we can't learn about math in art class, or in art class, we can't learn about math. And as I always tell folks, everybody sometimes looks at music and goes, "It's just not needed." I go, "You do realize the periodic table of elements is only here because the person that looked at the atoms was a wannabe musician who goes, octaves. oh, I wonder if I could line the elements up like they were octaves. And most of them you can do until you get to the rare earths, and then we put those two lines across the bottom of the table. But you look at this of the fine arts tend to be, and storytelling tends to be the things that get cut because we got to pass standardized tests. And at a school I was at that had the highest rating you get from the state, they asked, how do you do it? Well, in elementary, we have recess. In fact, it, junior high, because it wasn't middle school then, because we weren't kindler or gentler teachers, because I was actually a junior high teacher, not a middle school teacher, we would have activities where my class is challenging your class to kickball. And so we'd go have kickball. And somebody said, why'd you have kickball? The kids weren't going to learn anything until they got all this energy out of their system. And you kind of look at this, that gets into the stuff of storytelling because people relate to that. Because pastoring a church, along with other stuff that I do, you have the Sermon on the Mount from Jesus in the Bible in its entirety. And then you have Paul, who preached for a day, a night, and another day, and all that's recorded, a guy fell out the window and he brought him back to life. And you kind of look at it, you have to learn how to tell stories. And my problem is I tend to be too wordy because I like the sound of my own voice. And you tend to go into Paul. And I always got to remember the best way to tell a story is like Jesus did on the Sermon on the Mount, quick, to the point, and then get out.
Well, stories are fun, but there's some science behind why Jesus used stories to teach the people. And but I didn't mean to go to Jesus today.
No, that's okay. I like Jesus.
uh, and for all others, any rate. So with the whole idea about how we learn language and why stories are important has to do with the basic things that we communicate to each other. So if I want to communicate to you, I need to tell you, and I need to say who I'm talking about. I need to say what that person is doing, and I need to say what they're doing it with. And those are the three basic relationships or basic semantic relationships, or where they call them linguistic semantic relationships, that really are the foundation of our communication. So a story is about a person doing something. And so when we're talking about uh, things like science in school, we often, somehow or another, the science textbook always leaves the person out. So it's never a story about how a scientist discovered something. It's a story about the discovery in the abstract. And that's really hard for young people to grasp because it's not concrete. It's a very abstract idea. So I like to help the students bring all the context of the ideas within to the story. So who did it? Where were they? Why did they do it? How did they do it? Who else was there? When did all of this happen? And so that the contextual meaning of who, what, when, where, why, how is really the foundation of what a story is. And the more of that information that we put into a story, the richer the story is, the more memorable it is, the more likely the other person is to learn something from it and retain it and take it with them. So I really think that we take context out of school. We give our kids lists of words. How boring is that? I mean, I remember back when I was in elementary school just absolutely despising that activity because it had no meaning to me, and it still has no meaning. But what does have meaning is if you draw a picture and you label the ideas and you learn the language that you want to use to express yourself. So you learn to write and read the things that you want to say, and you learn to express the basic agent action object relationships, and then expand and modulate all of those with adding who, and I mean adding when and where and why and how. And So stories really are the foundation of how the brain works. And so it's not just having fun when we tell stories with the children and when we ask them to tell stories to us. It's actually developing language, and it's a brain based activity. So next time somebody criticizes you for telling stories, tell them that the neuroscientists say that this is how we learn. So, yeah.
Well, and I will go in one to kind of get serious because this is almost an interesting story because this poor person here didn't know she's going to be saddled with somebody that goes, well, I was handed this topic uh, 27 minutes ago.
We're
What?
just making
We're,
something up to
we're
fill
making
up the
it up.
time. Sorry,
And
y'all.
do you know what most stories are? They're made up. Do, do you know Frankenstein was just folks trying to scare one another over a holiday weekend when it was snowing? And all of a sudden, you have this whole genre from even going to Frankenstein's wife, the one that had the Monty Python ish stuff. But it's all on the same theme of, oh, and it's a biological theme. If we had this magical new thing called electricity to unanimated cells, they'll come back to life. So it has biology in it. And you kind of get this. You kind of don't know where a story is going to end. I always love the never-ending story. Of course, I watched it on a movie because you want me to read. I'm a little dyslexic and dame damaged because I get letters in the wrong spot. That's why I'm dame damaged. Hopefully, you'll get that eventually. No one laughed. It's terrible when they don't give you laughs to your jokes. But the thing that you get with stories is if you know the intent that you're getting, you can actually direct kids in a classroom to go, oh, we have to write a story. And they just go, and we're going to write a story about healthy eating because I was teaching sixth grade health right then. And they're going, ah, can't you just give us a worksheet and we just fill it out? No, we go write a story. Now, why should you eat your vegetables? Oh, God, I don't know. Well, no. And there's one vegetable I want to talk to you about spinach. We got to eat our spinach. So, like Popeye will be strong. We are going to be able to kill the evil critter called health education. And I go, why do I have you for a teacher? I don't like this. Because I would tell them a story. Oh, we need to thank our Arab friends because we didn't used to know how to count nothing. And they go, huh? Well, you do know it was an Arab mathematician that invented zero. Huh? Well, how do you not count the people, or how do you count the blue and white with pink polka dot elephants that are in this room? There aren't any. I know there's zero of them. Aren't you glad we got a zero? Because we'd have to sit and figure out how to not count something. And they go, can you please just give me a worksheet? Please, just give me a worksheet. I don't like all this storytelling, but you remember this. And I had one time, and I always love when this does because I tell stories. This person writes them. I'm envious of her. I would hear the thing of one, since I'm now a DER person, and people go, DER. I've got initials after my name, and it's Dr. So and so. I said, when I hear Mr. and I'm in my hometown, and it normally starts this way, Mr. Fry, do you remember me? No, but I bet I had you for seventh or eighth grade math or PE, health, some. Yeah, you did. I was in the class that you said, I am going to learn you fractions. And we did the fractions chapter 4 times. I hated that story. But I run 3 mechanic shops now. Do you know fractions and millimeters and all these subdivisions of things are very important. I said, aren't you glad I learned your fractions? And now that sounds bad, but that's where you can get with telling stories because you will remember a story better. As I said, being a pastor of a church, and I go there all the time because I said, I like to. It causes it fights. It's fun. I said, I have extremely almost never had a person leave the sanctuary humming my sermon. But the music, they'll hum. And sometimes, if you're a pastor and you tell a good joke that is meaningful to your sermon topic, they will retell your joke. And I will tell you one to give you an example of this is like storytelling of why I do it. I'd go, oh, now imagine it's Sunday and we're in church. Now, how many of y'all out there have prayed for money? Now, raise your hand. Now, I'm a junior high teacher. I'll call on you. Now, how many of you prayed for money? I don't see any of you raise your hand. No one in this room has ever prayed for money. How many of y'all have ever found a penny laying on the street? The Lord wants you to be specific. I pray, Lord, I bought my six numbers. The lottery's over $500 million. I'm willing to share with four other people. I just need 100 million. And I did my part. Lord, I'm depending on you to do your part. And the Lord still hasn't done his part. Isn't that terrible? My story, though, is not over with because I'm still buying lottery tickets going, Lord, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to give you another chance. I need this lottery six numbers to come in. I will kind of even do some good work with the money, but I'll just live in a much better neighborhood. Get it back to you. We're going to see where this goes. This is kind of the funny thing. Don't add me in extra because I will just go off on my own tangent because I thoroughly intend to enjoy myself.
What you reminded me of the time when I went to church and the pastor preached about gluttony. And he had a big old sermon about gluttony. This was in the Southern Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and he was gluttony and gluttony and gluttony and so forth. And afterwards, we all went out for pizza, and I only had one slice. He says, well, Louise, why aren't you eating more pizza? I said, well, you just preached a sermon on gluttony. And he said, well, no, don't listen to that. Have some pizza. So, at any rate, that's nothing to do with story. That was a story. I just told a story. But getting back to the topic, to the more academic side of storytelling, we think about who we are as human beings, and our history goes back. Well, we aren't sure how long our history goes back, but we do know that there were creatures that looked something like us a million years ago who spoke with each other and imparted knowledge to each other. And the way that was done was by the older people telling the younger people stories. And really, up until the 20th century, most people on planet Earth were not literate. So if you wanted to learn something, you learned it from an older person who already knew how to do it, who would tell you the story about how to make that thing, or tell you the story about how about our history, or the history of your family, or the history of your village. So this storytelling element is such a deeply rooted aspect of who we are that we have to remember that we still need that. And learning should still be fun, and stories are a way to make that enjoyment happen.
And to kind of get, how many of y'all remember the scene in Roots? Again, or at least I'm saying my age.
I was in junior high while he taught junior high. I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
But you had the story that Alex Haley is at the tribal thing, and they go, well, can't you just tell me this? And the guy says, no, I have to tell you the story from the beginning because he learned it by ear. He learned it one way, and it was almost like stuff. Because if I say this, and we'll see how many older people we've got, if I go plop, plop, Fizz Fizz.
Oh, what a relief it is.
That commercial has not been on the air for 35 years, but we learned it orally. And they're going through it. I love the last scene where Alex Haley, well, his stand in. They're going through and they finally hear, oh, and Kunta Kinte. And he goes, that's who I'm trying to find. So he was a member of this tribe. And he had to tell the whole story because sometimes when you tell a story, I get folks, you just like telling stories. Well, yeah, because I get to hear myself talk. But also, there's kind of lessons that you learn because when I told about the stuff on the jokes, people tell the joke that I did about I bought my lottery ticket. And if you tell a good enough joke as a pastor, they will retell it. And hopefully they'll say, oh, I heard it in church. Yeah, the pastor is making this strange comment about praying for money. And it will lead to other discussions. Because when we story tell, we're normally trying to have some sort of lesson. I love Dick and Jane. I was in that era that we had the book Dick and Jane, and it was very detailed, and
Boring.
they we were
See Spot,
run
run. Run, Spot,
spot run.
run.
Back in my era, because I'm probably one of the more senior youth here, we weren't as smart as y'all. They had to do it slowly. Yeah, you can't look at the picture and go, well, that's a dog running. Oh, the dog's named Spot. Now we do that in stories. It was like, oh, we have to repeat it. And there was a theory because I swear to this day, I was in the transition between phonics and sight words. That's why I can't spell because I go, I think if you can only come up with one way to spell a word, you're not extremely creative since we've had people talk about creative. Because I'm going to use the PH in pneumonia to start this word. And people go, huh? What do you mean pH in pneumonia? It starts with a PH. It's silent though. Don't know why we have it. We just like to add PHs. So maybe it's kind of like whenever we put our initials after our name when we get that degree.
I thought pneumonia started with a PN.
A PN? Well, that's close enough. An N is just an H that lost its stick.
And a good morning starts with a O.
Okay, now.
This is degenerating. Hey, do you guys have any questions? Why
Yeah,
don't
do you
people
have any
come up to us
questions
and
about
let's have a
stories? Because
conversation? Because there's not very many people in this room, and we could
yeah,
have.
and
I wanna
and I
hear from
could
other
say
people.
if there was some more people sitting on the front row, I'd give you $100 bill, but that's a lie. But that actually is a story
He's
that I
telling
had
you a
once.
story.
When no, no, no,
You have
this
a
is it.
question back here?
Oh, we have a question.
Can you come a little closer and speak? Say it here. Tell the microphone.
Yeah. What? Mhm.
In the books we used back in the day. So I was just wondering about there's a lot of conversation now going on about the science of literacy and what's being taught. What are your thoughts on that? You mentioned phonics, so that's my
I do have some of
Thank you.
that highfalutin knowledge just because I made it all the way to the 38th grade. But one of the things that I would get that we used to do that we're doing different now is we have more exposure to language, and they're actually stories that the pictures match the words, which are interesting. So the kids go, "You mean reading ain't boring? You mean I should read stuff and actually enjoy it? Wow." And this is one of the things that I think is a major improvement because well, I'm talking for myself, when we were going through, they had a certain number of words, and for some reason, these were the words they thought if they taught us, we would be literate. And it, I'm glad in spite of that, we learned it because that's the only way I know how to say it. And you're the expert. I'm making this up as I'm going on, but. I make up good stuff because I write grand and glorious thoughts on paper and people send millions of dollars.
We're going to talk about that.
Oh, yeah, no, and I got to give you a card.
Yes. Um, there's different ways that we can learn to read. Phonics has been hugely popular for quite some time now. Phonics is really interesting because the original idea behind phonics came out of linguistics, where linguists were examining the letter sound relationships in language. So, for example, a language like Spanish has what's called regular orthography. That means that the sound that goes with the letter that you see on the page is always the same. English, on the other hand, is a language that's made of a bunch of languages that have been smushed together. And that's a very scientific way of explaining that. So when you smush all these languages together, what happens is you have different spelling systems that are put into one language. And so we end up with a lot of different ways to express the same sound. Like OUGH can be a f sound or an oo sound, or PH can be f. And so it can be really tricky to try to sound out words in English because many of the words in English aren't actually English. They're Latin or Greek or French or Italian. They come from other languages. So English has what's called an irregular orthography. So I think phonics is really fun, but I've noticed for the special need population, often that is not a way that they can learn to read. And I know that we have a belief as teachers that you have to be able to do sounds and letters to read. But the truth is, deaf people can learn to read. So that means you don't have to have sounds in order to be able to learn to read. So there are other ways to learn to read, and that is a more visual way. So when you take the text and you look at a word as a shape of an idea, and you look at that whole shape and you memorize that whole shape as if it were a picture, that's a visual way to learn to read. So with my students who don't respond to phonics, I ask them to see the ideas on the page and make pictures in their head. Because that's what reading is about, is making pictures in your head of what the other person is trying to let you know. And we don't have to use sound to read. In fact, I can read very fast silently to myself, and I can't read very fast when I'm reading out loud. So, we don't have to have sound to learn how to read. Some kids thrive on that, and that's great. But if you have a child who's reached the middle school age and is still not reading, more phonics is just not going to do the trick. What's going to do the trick for them is to use use the shape of the ideas as the basis of how they remember those patterns. And so I think it's really fascinating how it all works and how it's not one size fits all. And some kids have to be able to write the ideas in order to see them. Some kids can sound them out. Some kids can see it and write it immediately. I have students who can write and read anything, but have no clue whatsoever what it meant. And to me, the meaning of what you read, the story that's contained in those written ideas, that's the point of it. Why would you even bother to write something if there's not some information or an idea that you want to convey to other people? So I could go on and on. Another thing that I think is really interesting about reading instruction is that we ask students to read out loud as fast as they can. Well, for our visual learners, when you read a passage aloud and it's the first time you've seen that passage, you are so busy making the sounds that you don't remember a single thing that you just read. So if I give you a Dibbles test and you can read 120 words a minute or whatever, um, but you can't answer the questions back, it's because you read it out loud to me. So if I want to ask people to do reading comprehension, I ask them to read to themselves. And if I want to know if you can decode really fast, then I'll ask you to read out loud. Another time I like to have students read out loud is so that I can see which words they actually don't know. And so, I mean, there's reading out loud has its place, but it's not the only thing to do. And reading silently has its place and isn't the only thing. I think it's important not to be what's the word?
Dogmatic.
Dogmatic, yes. I mean, because, for example, I'm trained in Dr. Arwood's neurosemantic language learning theory, and I worked for her for a number of years and used her methods. And I used Fidelity when I worked at her clinic. But now that I work for myself, I bring in other things as well because she's not the last word on education. Nobody is the last word on education. I think it's an ongoing revelation. We're all learning and continuing to learn, and it's important to be able to let go of something that you used to think was true and be okay with the fact that you used to think that was true and now you know differently. And so,
That's called learning.
yeah.
Uh, and the other thing that I'll get that sounded funny to my students when I was a special ed teacher until I learned how to write grants and could get, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the Kurzweil 3000. I'll explain what that is in a minute. I was a horrid reader, stuttering. And whenever I finally got to graduate school and before they had all the CAT scans and stuff, they had a test that was called the Halstead-Raytan test of neurological impairment. Learned how to not only give it, but was given it, and found out I probably have a slight temporal lobe lesion. Makes some of the stuff clear and neural connections went around it. But the Kurzweil 3000 was one thing that I got because one, you could punch a button on a computer that had an optical scanner. Kurzweil is the person that, if you've seen MIDIs and the electronic keyboards, he kind of invented that. But he had a son that was a horrible dyslexic. And he went, well, I'm going to get something to read to my son because he needs something he can take with him that'll read stuff to him. So he came up with this system, and it's an optical recognition device. The thing that I said once with the sight words versus phonics, the Kurzweil 3000 actually highlights the word that it's saying. And I went, that makes sight words make sense because you know that pattern that goes up, up, over, down is the. And you can't get sight words when somebody's just reading something because it doesn't highlight the word it's saying. The other thing that the Kurzweil did, because since I started out life when I was a retread to education, we'll see if you all get this next joke. I'm warning you, because I was the Hoover vacuum cleaner salesman who could proudly say my product sucks. Oh, I heard chickle. I'm glad I got you. So you got the joke. If you have Hispanic parents who go, and I apologize if this offends you, I'm still going to do it this way. Oh, I, I don't do English good. I don't. Can you press a button? Huh? And I'd take them over the computer, which had the Kurzweil. I said, can you press this button? See? I said, I just need you to press the button and then you can talk to the kids because you can speak Spanish and I can't speak anything but tamale, burrito, carne guisada. I speak good Spanish. But yeah, you don't get looking like this if you don't like food. But the thing that
Somebody help me.
I just and people, whenever they've had me and stuff, go, I can't believe you said this. You you can't say things like that. Oh, nope, nope, nope. I'm a certified English teacher in 2 states. What you meant to say is you wish I wouldn't say that because can't implies I'm not physically able. And since I already said it, I am physically able. So grammatically, you're not correct. And they go, eh. But the thing that I've got is was able to use technology I got, and these Kurzweil systems at the time I was buying them only cost $6,000 a system. Now this was in the early '90s. You know what, 6,000 extra just to buy one thing? We can't buy that. We can't even buy paper. And but I got $250,000 literacy grant, so I bought me 20 of them. And I still had $130,000 to do other literacy stuff. So I got Ralph down with his books and gave kids books, and he read books to them and told the story of it and how he came up with it. And people go, how'd you do that? money. Nothing personal. I really wish legislators would fully fund education, but they never are. And this was one of the things that I always remember because it came up in my dissertation defense. I still remember Sylvia, who didn't want to be called Dr. Lyles. I don't like what you're saying about grants because that will make where the state doesn't have to fully fund education. I said, well, Sylvia, that's true. So it's really good if you got somebody like me because our kids do better because there are starfish and we're saving them. But, in a dissertation, I really am not supposed to talk about what should be. I'm supposed to talk about what is. And she went, uh, gee, uh, and people said, "What'd you do?" I said, "I needed her not to ask me as many questions in the dissertation because she might be able to come up with something I didn't know." But I kind of shut her down. And the other thing that's got is knowing your story, because when you're a teacher, if you look at the kids and go, "You don't read well," okay. You know how I ask kids to read out loud in health class? Yeah, I, 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 do you get scared whenever that's going to happen? Uh-huh. You don't want the other kids to know you don't read well. Uh, yeah. See this paragraph right here? This is what we're going to read Monday when you get back from school. This is your paragraph. Well, how do you know that's going to be my paragraph? Because I'm going to call on you when we get to it. Now, you get with your parents and I'm going to read it to you, and you practice and you memorize it so that when it comes time for you to read it, you're not going to be embarrassed and you're not going to feel like you're stupid. And they go, well, that'll be real nice. That'll be real good. And somebody goes, you told a kid to hit. I said, it was the 90s. Things were different. You can't do that now. But with this kid, that became our stuff of reading in class. He knew what paragraph he was going to get called on. Well, what happens if I get called on to read a paragraph? And I'm the teacher. I am not going to call on you till we get to this paragraph. You don't have to worry about that. And the only thing it got is it built his confidence. He got to the point he was never good reading out loud, but all of a sudden it was kind of like going, I can read more of this. I went, mm-hmm. It's amazing. If you do something, you get better at it. And this was one of the things that I go that as teachers, if you have a student that is struggling, you kind of need to be aware of it and go, how can I modify the way we show that you're reading, especially when you're doing oral reading? Because again, that's just something we do in teacher school. I don't know if they still teach that, but that was one thing I got taught in teacher school. uh, so that you could check the kids that they're actually paying attention. I went, everybody that's not reading is not paying attention. They're just hoping they're not getting called on. But that's one thing that would kind of get in your mind because structure the kids for academic success, even if you have to do it, because people are very fond of, well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Yeah, but if you put enough salt in the oats before you take it to the water, it'll drink. I'll get it back to you because you actually know what you're talking about.
Oh, well, what is the topic today?
I don't know. It was something about stories. And you know what? We're telling a bunch of stories. So somebody should have been writing everything down. We might have
We
published it.
might make $1 million off of
Could.
this presentation.
Might
Yeah,
not, but we
right.
could. You never can tell.
And as the people trickle out one by one.
As I once told a person, if you get finished listening before I finish speaking, either or just sit there and do your head like this. And
So
people,
who else has some
yeah,
question
any
or some
questions?
thought that they want to?
Say,
Come on back up and
we got 3 minutes.
minutes. Okay, well, good.
Hey,
What a relief.
we've actually done our jobs. We filled up the whole time.
So, are there any other thoughts or questions that we can talk about in the next 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, I say we end early. What do
Yeah.
y'all think?
Yeah. Because are we close to the end of today and end of?
We all love to draw and write and talk about ourselves. And the to my way of thinking, the fastest way in with the younger students in particular is to ask them to talk and to tell a story about themselves because they know a story about themselves. If you ask them to tell a story about the War of 1812, they
Not so
may
much.
not have that information, but they certainly can tell a story about their own home or their dog or their mom or the toy they got for their birthday. So having children tell stories about themselves and then use those stories as the basis for literacy instruction, kids love that, and you'll get buy-in from it.
And sometimes what everybody always forgets about, and I will tell another story with this to get it. Ask the kids, what could I do to help you learn how to do this? Ask them, because most people don't. Because one time, whenever I was doing early morning devotionals at a church camp, and you're getting people on prayer lists, wasn't getting any names, and it had the small kids. And I finally said, you know, we're not getting a whole lot of names, and pets are people too. Does anybody have a pet they're concerned about? Because we need to pray for your pets too. And one little kid, I'm worried about Fluffy. When I left, we took her to the vet, and I don't. Well, let's put Fluffy's name on here. And the only thing that got to be hilarious, we got as many pet names from the adults as we did from the kids. But the kids now were involved in the story. So they actually were sharing and praying for some of the adults' pets. And it was kind of one of the only true intergenerational church events we were having because everybody had a pet they wanted to pray for. That's why I always bring up religion. Anybody else? Oh,
Thank
and
you,
if
everybody.
anybody wants anything with grants, I'll be back here. I'm running out of cards, but I'm giving you one because I've got to get some stuff with your writing. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we do.
Excellent job. Thank you to our last fireside chat.